Good evening all, and welcome. I'm going to be doing a special giveaway when I hit 3,000 followers on Twitter and Instagram, one prize for each. I'm going to be doing milestone giveaways more frequently. I'm also trying to grow my following because I've got something exciting I want to share with you guys, so if you want to be informed and win some stuff and, just be up to date really, I'd really appreciate it if you could check it out. So when we hit 3,000 on each, I'm going to do a little giveaway and I'll announce the winner in a video and private message them. In any case, I'd really appreciate it if you could check those places out. But for now, it's time to get comfortable and let the darkness take control. I am the youngest of two daughters. My sister Isabel being a year older than me, and we are polar opposites, physically, mentally, and emotionally. Isabel is a buxom version of my father, her body having developed quite early. Both of them are control freaks, who think that their word is law, and they should get away with whatever they want, with no one having any right to refuse. But they can never make a stand against my mother, who is a mostly reasonable and calm, nurturing person. The thing is, when she loses her temper, no one wants to cross her, because she is a tsunami. There is no one who gets in her way. I am just like her. During her youth and when she reached adulthood, with an underdeveloped body that caused many to always mistake us for being younger than we were. I also have her somewhat aloof attitude with strangers, but I'm super sweet with people I care about. I also have a habit of ignoring those who try to get on my nerves, but with my mother's temper, which both my father and sister disapprove of, since I made it clear that I won't let anyone control me. Although I do respect my parents very much. This first story takes place when I was about 12 years old. I'm 34 now, but the memory of that time is still one of the most vivid and frightful memories I have. And whenever I try to talk about it with my sister, she freaks out because she doesn't want to remember. I don't know if these two incidences in the story I'm about to tell you are related or not. We used to live in a flat situated on the ground floor of the building that we moved into, and often felt like we weren't the only ones residing there. Many times out of the corner of our eyes, we would see someone peeking at us from around the corner of wherever we were, but whenever we looked, there was no one there. Although we had neighbors also living on the ground floor, and 2 stories above us, we were mostly the types to keep to ourselves, mainly because our parents were quite protective of us, partly because my older was constantly being reported by neighbors and schoolmates flirting with a guy who caught her fancy, even though she was only 13. We had chosen that particular flat on the ground floor due to the fact that my mother, Rosaline, suffered an accident when I was 7, where she broke her hip and had to have it replaced with a metal joint. She walked with a limp and had to support herself with a cane whenever she moved about. This first incident occurred one night during a weekend, Saturday, a few months before my mother was diagnosed with leukemia. None of us had turned in yet, so we were all still awake, although we were getting ready for bed since it was already 10 p.m. Our German Shepherd puppy, Bonkers, was in the bedroom that I shared with my parents and my older sister, resting his chin on my mother's lap and dozing as she scratched the area behind his ear as she read the true life story section of Reader's Digest. My father, Edgar, was reading the newest edition of Car and Driver, while my sister Isabel was reading a teenage romance. I, however, had been reading The Hound of the Baskervilles. I went to the toilet to answer a call of nature, and after I finished with my business, washed my hands and exited the bathroom, turning off the light as I did so. After I turned off the bathroom light, I noticed that the beaded curtain hanging in the doorway at the end of the corridor that led to the dining room and living room was moving, as if someone had just passed through. We never turned off the lights in those parts of the house, since the living room had only one window, but the dining room had none, so everything would be close to pitch black, even in broad daylight, if we did not keep the lights on. I thought it was Isabel, probably going to get a drink before bed, since she always had the habit of doing that. So naturally I followed to see what she was going to swipe from the fridge. The fridge was in the dining room, since the kitchen was quite small and didn't have enough space to accommodate it comfortably. When I reached the dining room, I was surprised to see that there was no one there, when suddenly I felt an unexplainable chill go through my body, followed by a feeling of terror that made me shake all over. I turned and raced back down the corridor to the bedroom, realizing that something was behind me, chasing me, trying to get its nightmarish hands on me. I could almost feel its breath on my neck, and an unspoken command to turn and see what it was. But thankfully, I was too scared out of my head to heed those words, and upon reaching the bedroom door, I wrenched it open, barreling inside, ignoring my father's booming roar of a, "God damn it, Eleanor, what the hell are you doing this time of night?" I looked at him long enough to see the fury on my father's face, and that Isabel, my mother, was there with him. The two looked surprised before Bonkers sprang to his feet, alert. His ears were perking up before he started growling, as I slammed the bedroom door shut and locked it. Suddenly, something slammed against the door, the impact shaking the wood violently. Bonkers began barking at the top of his lungs, his eyes on the door as I turned and ran into my mother's arms, terrified beyond words. What the hell? No sooner had Isabel spoken when a demonic growl sounded outside the door, followed by scratching. I think I fainted at that point, because when I opened my eyes, it was 6 a.m. and the sun was rising. My mother was lying beside me, still awake, with both her arms around me like she didn't want to let me go. Ever. Bonkers was on my stomach, his tiny paws on my still flat chest, as if trying to protect my heartbeat. My father and Isabel must have dozed off sometime during the night, the former propped up near the footboard of the king-size bed that my parents shared, the latter on my father's side of the bed behind my mother. "How are you feeling, baby?" my mother asked, gently brushing the hair from my face, when I turned to face and hug her, after scratching Bonkers behind the ear. The terror from the previous night came back to me, and I started to cry. My mother held me, the way she always did. It took a long time for me to calm down, but when I finally did, I managed to tell everyone present, Bonkers included, what exactly had happened the previous night. I will never forget the look on their faces when I was done, but needless to say, the end results were that Mama's friends were called to cleanse the house and burn sage. A priest was also asked to do a blessing, although none of them stopped the nightmares that plagued me after it. If only it worked. 3 months later, we were told that my mother had leukemia, and my world fell apart. It was also around the time that the second incident occurred, just after I had forgotten about the night terror I'd experienced. It was summer vacation, so we were allowed to sleep in. My parents left for my mother's checkup one morning around 8 a.m., and I was asleep on their bed, which is right next to the double deck my sister and I use. My sister was sleeping on the upper bunk, and barely 15 minutes after my parents left, I heard someone saying, "Psst, from the foot of my parents' bed. I thought it was my older sister, so I didn't pay it any attention and tried to go back to sleep. Suddenly, I felt something change, and then an ominous, demonic growl sounded from the foot of the bed. I don't remember ever moving so fast in my preteen years. I threw the covers and scrambled onto the upper bunk where I found my older sister still sleeping, but my arrival jolted her awake. Before she could snap at me for waking her so suddenly, we heard the growling again, only this time it came from the spot on my parents' bed that I had just vacated, and we felt like something was glaring at us, even though it was broad daylight and there wasn't anyone else in the room but us. My sister and I huddled together under her blanket, and I could feel that whatever was there was watching us as we lay there the whole time. Since the bedroom door was on the other side of the room, there was no way that we could get out. When our parents came back from the hospital, they found us shaking, and we couldn't even speak. When we finally could talk, we told them what happened. It was obvious they believed us, and didn't leave us for the rest of the day. I remember clinging tightly to my mother for that whole week. And when my older sister and I managed to talk about what happened, she told me one of the things that had freaked her out about the encounter was how white my face was and how scared I'd looked, since I was always the braver one of the two. She said that the last time she had seen me look so scared was on the night that I had been chased into the bedroom by what she suspected was a demonic spirit. My mother succumbed to the leukemia that tore at her body during Christmas of that year, and in losing her, I lost the one person who had ever truly loved me. For the next story I wish to share with you, it's important to note that I am from the Philippines. I've had several paranormal experiences since I was a child, including the ones from earlier, although they are most limited to seeing figures out of the corner of my eye that aren't there when I look, or the feeling of another presence with me, and knowing that I am not alone. Although there is an encounter where I saw a figure as clear as day in the wee hours of the morning that still haunts me. I was 16 years old this time, and spending the weekend with two of my cousins from my late mother's side, since my father was going to be working to fill in a co-worker who had taken a few days off due to his wife giving birth to a new child. I arrived at my aunt's house on a cloudy Friday evening that promised a heavy night of rain with some overnight clothes, and my cousins, Erin and Will, aged 11 and 8 respectively. We were happy to see them, and after dinner I helped the housekeeper with the dishes while my aunt gave the kids their pre-bedtime baths, and soon we were all settled in for the night. I was given the guest room, overlooking the backyard that had a huge tree that bears a fruit that we call chico here in the Philippines. After a quick Google Translate, I learnt that it's called sapota, or may be known as mud apple or nooseberry. In any case, said tree overlooks the mini swimming pool that is directly below my window. Erin came to my room with her pillow, asking if she could sleep next to me. I was more than happy to oblige, since she was my favorite amongst all the cousins on my mother's side. Her little brother Will followed a few minutes later, asking if he could sleep in my room also, but I could sense that Erin had come into my room to get away from Will, since he was her parents' preferred child, and she often felt left out. Even without saying it, I knew Erin also asked to sleep in my room, since I was one of the few people who wasn't that fond of her brother, and I always preferred her company over his. I explained to Will that if he and Erin slept in my room, his mother would be alone, and that it would be really sad. He bought onto my reasoning, and bid us all good night. Erin fell asleep beside me almost instantly while holding my hand, and after a few minutes of listening to her breathing, I too fell asleep, just as the rain started to fall, with the comforting pitter-patter outside the window. Some of the branches of the tree outside the window were long and thick, and I could clearly see a figure that looked like an 8-year-old boy, standing with one of his hands resting on the trunk, as if for balance. The funny thing is that the figure was completely black. I couldn't see any of its facial features. The only distinguishable detail I could make out, aside from what I described earlier, was the figure's short but somewhat unruly hair. Although I could see the figure's face, I could feel its eyes on me the entire time. I don't know why, but I wasn't scared, and my mind was completely blank. Probably because I was still sleepy, even though I knew that what I was looking at was real. After returning the figure's gaze for a full minute, I gave it a casual wave to say goodnight, and lay back down beside Erin. I fell asleep as soon as I closed my eyes. When I next opened them, I found that it was 7:30 in the morning, and everyone else was only just starting to stir. Remember the figure from 3 a.m.? I sat up slowly, careful not to wake Erin, and looked at the tree that was now bathed in sunlight. The figure was now gone. I didn't speak about the 3 a.m. encounter, since I knew that Erin specifically was terrified of ghosts. However, I told my father when he picked me up Sunday afternoon. He didn't say anything, but I could tell that it troubled him so. He told me to draw the curtains next time I was asked to sleep over, and I always closed the curtains at home. But since Erin had asked to leave them open when I slept there, I had obliged. What do you think the figure was? I know of these little dwarves/elves in Filipino folklore, along with some malevolent entities that my older sister and I simply refer to as plant people, since they can appear as plants or shapeshift into someone you know, only to snatch you away if you're close enough for them to grab you. The first time I had a supernatural experience, I was about 5 years old. My mother used to fly sailplanes earlier in her youth, and still had a lot of friends in the airfield, and would often take me with her for a bit of hanging around, grilling, or flying on small planes owned by her friends. It was always a lot of fun. Bordering the airfields were woods where a lot of people associated with the place had small summer cabins for staying over. This one weekend, my mum and I were going to stay at her friend's cabin. It was already dark when we got there, and I remember first walking into it and looking around. There was a large dining table with chairs, and just to the left of the entrance, a beautifully carved wooden chest. The head of the table was about 2 meters away from the chest, and that's where I sat while my mum and the other lady went into the adjacent kitchen to cook up something to eat. The door to the kitchen was at the other end of the table, right in front of me. So the little me was sitting on the chair, dangling my legs as I couldn't reach the floor, drawing, when I felt something hug me from behind. I knew it wasn't my mum, as I had just seen her go into the kitchen. I didn't get too long to contemplate, as the grip tightened and I got swung backwards along with the chair. I was sitting on it and was dragged backwards towards the chest. The chair slammed into it with such force that I almost fell over. Naturally, I started screaming. Both women ran to me, my mum lost trying to calm me. My mum's friend looked a little shaken, but said that they were bogeymen living in the chest, and that they have always been strange things happening, but she had never seen anything this severe. We did stay the night, but nothing else happened. But this has been etched into my memory. I recently asked my mum about it, and she confirmed that it wasn't just my mind playing tricks on me. The second time I was a little older. My mum and I had moved out of my grandparents and into our own apartment, but I would still visit my grandparents every weekend and stay over. I think I must have been about 7 at the time. It was around 9 in the evening, and my grandma was putting me to bed. The bed was positioned in such a way that my feet were facing the door and I could see the corridor. As it was still a bit early for my grandparents, they closed my door so the hallway light would not bother me. I rolled onto my side, thinking that I wasn't tired at all, looking for my Tetris game I had near the bed, when I saw the bright light at the door. Figuring it was my grandma checking in to see if I wasn't about to do exactly what I was planning to do, I turned back to the door and it was closed. The light was coming from above it. As my eyes adjusted to the brightness, I could make out stairs in the beam of light, and then bare feet descending. I quickly decided that I did not want to see whatever it was that was coming down the steps, and did what any kid would do, hid under the covers. When I finally got the courage to look out again, it was dark. The third experience happened years later. By this time, I had rekindled the relationship with my father and would visit him during the weekends and holidays. He lived on the opposite side of the same city, a little on the outskirts, and I would have to take 2 buses to get there. It was autumn, and darkness came earlier this season. The second bus I was taking would start its route in the city centre, pass a shady neighbourhood, then go through some fields, up a long hill, and finally get to the suburb in which he lived. As it was a Friday evening, the bus was quite full, and I was standing next to the door looking out. I couldn't see that much with the bus being lit, and there being twilight outside. I leaned my face against the glass so I could see better. At this time, the bus had just started climbing the hill I mentioned earlier. There was nothing but open, weedy fields and a few scattered trees out there, and I could see a man running across the fields. My first thought was that he was out jogging. But why was he jogging in the field? The weeds were waist high, definitely not a pleasant evening run. The man was dressed in all white, which made it easy for me to follow him. As I was watching him, I started to get an eerie feeling, but I couldn't put my finger on it. So I kept at it, and then it sort of hit me. The road up with the hill was a long, straight one, where no one kept to the speed limit, and the bus was going at least 60. But I had been watching this man run through waist-long grass parallel to the bus for a few minutes now, and he wasn't in any way lagging behind. As soon as that realization got to me, the man turned slightly and stepped towards the road. My eyes were glued. As I remembered the last time something like this happened, I hid under the covers and almost missed it. So I was determined. The man got closer and closer, bigger and bigger, and then slammed against the glass of the door right in my face. I felt the impact and recoiled, and then the man just disappeared. I looked around at the other passengers. Surely someone must have seen it, surely. There was another person standing right next to me, looking out the same door window. Nothing. None of them saw a thing. When the bus finally reached my stop, there was still a bit of walking through a wooded area to get to my father's house. I don't think I've ever ran so fast in all my life, before or since. The creepy part came on Sunday when I was going home, this time in daylight. I wasn't going to go through there at night. I was looking onto the other side of the road, trying to find some clues as to what happened, and right at the spot where I had seen the ghostly man hit the bus was a pile of dead brown flowers and burnt out candles, the kind people put at the sites of accidents, when someone passes away. My grandpa was the best man I have ever met. He was like a father to me as a child, as I didn't have one of my own, or one that wasn't a psychotic Marine Corps drill instructor. He would play pranks on me as a child until my teen years. He would mess with me until the day he died, and he would try to scare me, poke my ears when I was sitting in front of him, and just play jokes on poor, unexpecting people. About 2 years ago, he met up with some friends that we lived next to in Alaska. He hadn't seen them in about 18 years, since I was a baby. My grandpa was in the army as a paratrooper, and the friends he was meeting on that day were also stationed there, and he was bunkmates. Even back then, he would pull pranks on the rest of the guys. My grandfather met them in town and had a great day. He showed them around, showed them Fort Knox and everything his little town had to offer. He took them to the mall and then out to eat. Normal friend stuff. However, there are photos that add only mystery to the story. In the photos, you can see him and my grandma side by side, and then the old neighbor's friends that he used to hang out with. But as the day goes on, you can see my grandfather's face turn from happy to sour. And in the last photos, it almost looks like he's looking into the distance and sees a ghost, as he's got a terrified expression on his face. I have only seen this face when he first wakes up in the morning. Pure fear. He probably has nightmares of everything he had to do while in the forces. He could never tell me, classification issues and the like. But he told me he made the mistake of looking into the eyes of the man whose life he ended, and that it would haunt him forever. He had horrible PTSD and would often sleep with a police scanner under his pillow. That he said it reminded him of military radios and helped him go to sleep. I thought this only brought more misery, but there's more on that coming soon. You see, my grandfather loved to smile, but that day he seemed off, looking into the distance, concerned, like he sees a ghost of some sort. A few hours after that photo was taken, he went home, sat in his favorite chair, turned on his favorite show, and told my grandma he was taking a nap, as he was feeling exhausted from that day. He never woke up. He was pronounced dead when the medics arrived. It hurts to this day, but I don't think his legacy stopped in that chair. He died at the end of March, and his funeral, fittingly, was on April 1st. Even in his casket, he looked like he was smiling, as if he was gonna jump up at any moment and say April Fools and play a big joke. Even before that, when we had to confirm the body in the morgue, he looked like he was smiling and ready to jump up and mess with us. Here's where everything gets strange though. My grandma started having really vivid dreams with him, which is not uncommon for someone who just lost a loved one. After that, on their anniversary, my grandma got a phone call. The call was from my grandpa. It had his face, his number, his contact. This is coming from her. She's never lied. She said she immediately looked at his phone, and that it was still plugged in above the fireplace in the living room. Still had service and everything. She was so freaked out, but answered the call in hopes that she could talk beyond the grave. She said all she could hear was static, and then she heard a loud pop and the call ended. She will occasionally get calls from his cell phone, but she never answers it anymore. I arrived at my grandma's house earlier this year to help her in the cleaning of the process of her house. Her house is in terrible condition since a natural spring, right where the previous owner ended his life, mind you, sprung in their basement and has flooded all the way to the stairs leading into it. The water has been pumped out, but there is black mold covering everything. The place looks like an abandoned fallout shelter that got destroyed in some sort of blast. I tried to help her dig up all the old treasures from her basement, and this was the first time going down there since my grandfather had passed away. I already had reservations about the visit because my mum told me on her visits that my grandpa will mess with her, turn off lights, close doors, footsteps and whatnot, but I never expected anything to happen to me. The house had a whole new feel to it. It felt heavy, besides being partially destroyed. Every room appeared to have a bug infestation of some kind, which my grandmother didn't seem to mind, as she loves ladybugs. Not even in the first 30 minutes, my grandma tells me to grab my old house slippers from my old room. She tells me they're in the top drawer and she put them in there yesterday. I wanted the slippers because my grandma had cats, and those cats weren't very tidy if you know what I mean. I walk into the room, turn on the light, and I open the drawer only to find that nothing is there. I open a few drawers and find old toys from where I was a kid, but no slippers. I tell my grandmother that nothing is in the drawer, and my mum walks into the room and opens the drawer only to find nothing inside either. My grandmother makes her way into my room and proceeds to open the drawers. She struggles as if it's heavy, and then it swiftly slides open. The drawer is no longer empty, but filled with old books, board games, toys and trinkets. And finally, my slippers, laying atop of everything. My mum and I step back in astonishment. The drawer had absolutely nothing in it, but has somehow magically filled itself with everything. It almost resembled a magic trick done in Vegas. It took a while to get rid of the weird vibe I had from the magical drawer, but I did start noticing things around the house that didn't make sense in the following days. My grandmother would have things laid out that went missing, only to be found in the exact same place they were left. I found an old bottle of my grandpa's cologne in my bag. Lights would blow or turn off. The barn/shed areas of the garage would open and close by themselves, even with the batteries taken out of the remote, and you could hear footsteps, hear loud wind on the windows when there was no wind outside, and constantly have strange dreams. On the last night I was there, I had a strange dream that I documented. In the dream I was working on my grandma's computer, as she was walking around doing random cleaning things while my mum was on her phone texting on the couch. We were all in the living room, and I walked into the kitchen, in the other room, only to find that the basement door had been turned into a large dining room area, and the dining room was still a dining room, but I didn't think much about it. I filled a glass of water and looked out the kitchen window into the large field behind her house. There was a car, a green car, a '69 Corvette Stingray, that drove through the backyard from the driveway and parked itself in the grass. I turned around and asked my grandma if one of my grandpa's friends drove a Corvette. She walked into the kitchen with me and said, "No," but looked outside with me, only to find there was nothing in the backyard. She asked me what I was talking about, to which I told her about the car that had just seemed to disappear. She told me that I sounded crazy. But as I looked out the front window, I could see more cars pulling into the driveway. The first one was a teal Acura NSX. The second was a bright white color Porsche 911, and the third was some sort of red muscle car that I couldn't pinpoint. All three pulled into the backyard and disappeared. My grandma said that the ghost of the house was messing with us, to which I replied, "What ghost?" So she told me about two twin girls that died in a fire in that house, that haunted and supposedly played jokes on people. We didn't even stop to think whether or not it was my grandpa. I walked into the other room, and my grandma told me to come back quickly. I ran back, and we heard footsteps in front of us. She told me it was the little girls trying to lead her to something. She followed them, but I went back into the other room, and continued working on the computer. My mum was asking me what was going on. But hold on. Before I start this part, I do want to say that any time I'm telling this story, it happens. I will explain later. My mum asked what was going on, and I tried to explain, when suddenly we got a call. The caller ID said 0. We thought it was bizarre, so she answered it and hung up saying no one was there. Suddenly the house phone started next to me. My cell phone, my mum's cell phone, and my grandma's cell phone, we all got calls from the same number. 0. I answered them all, but couldn't remember what was being said on the phone. I remember it being important, but I don't remember what was said. I couldn't even remember what was being said when I woke up the next day. Back to the dream. My mum runs into the kitchen where my grandma is still trying to follow the footsteps that are leading in circles. I stand up and go back into the kitchen to help and just explain what happened. Suddenly everyone keeps hearing the footsteps go away and a little girl's voice laughing. We thought it was weird, and my mum followed it while I stayed back and watched. As my mum walked in front of the dining room, that was supposed to be the basement door entrance, towards me, when suddenly a bell that was tied to a Christmas tree started moving and jingling. I told everyone to stop as soon as I heard it, and told them that this wasn't two little girls playing games, but that it was in fact my grandpa. They stopped and said, "Oh yeah." For some odd reason everything stopped, and I decided for some reason that I needed a new glass of water. Oddly enough, when I went to the cabinet to get some water, there was an old clock attached to the front of it. It was ticking very loudly and reminded me of my grandpa, who again used to work on clocks of that nature. I opened the cabinet to grab a glass, but then, when I closed it, I saw a reflection of a face behind me. I turned around. I don't remember what I saw, but I remember the dream flash orange like fire. And then I woke up. I didn't tell my family about the dream, and I kept it to myself, since we were pretty weirded out already. I then started working in a problem my grandma was having with her modem. While my grandma was on the phone with the internet company, she told me to come over, handed me the phone, and told them to talk to me, but to listen in the background. In the background you could hear a military radio. It was very distinct and sounded old. My grandparents lived near Fort Knox, about 50 miles away. Not enough for interference. They usually have Chinook helicopters fly by, but they are very loud and noticeable, and I do not recall any of them flying at the time. If you remember, my grandfather used to listen to police scanners all the time, because it would mimic the sound of the military radio which he used to comfort him, so that he could fall asleep. Later on that day we got home, and I told my mum about what happened in the dream. As soon as I got to the part about the strange phone call, with the caller ID of 0, she got a phone call. The caller ID, bunch of zeros. She told me to shut up and asked if I was playing some tech-savvy joke on her, and I assured her I was doing nothing of the sort, and that it was just a coincidence with the story. Could it have been something more? Now at night, I work at a pizza place, and sometimes me and a few friends from there will hang out after closing with the manager, and just talk, tell jokes and stories and the like. However, I got to this story, and as soon as I was talking about the phone call, my phone rang. Luckily it was just my girlfriend, wondering where I was, but as soon as I hung up, I told people about what happened with my mother, and then the phone rang again. This time it was the store phone. The caller ID said unknown, which isn't uncommon where we work, and it usually means prank calls, but this was 1 a.m. on a Thursday morning. Everyone in the city knows that we're closed. I answered it, put it on speaker, and you could just hear static along with heavy breathing. I made everyone in the store take out their phones to prove that they had not made the call, and all phones were cleared as the phone line kept going with the breathing. Suddenly we got more interference that sounded like police radio, but only very briefly, and then it was gone. But it wasn't heavy or intentional, the breathing. It sounded like someone was breathing out of their nose and into a mic unintentionally. My co-worker asked who it was, but of course, there was no reply. Then I said, "Pa?" and immediately the line hung up. It was chilling, and I thought it would be best if we all stopped sharing stories and just went home. I'm not sure what it was, something malicious, or, as I hope, could it be my grandfather? I also want to add that I did get a phone call while typing this out, but it was from a telemarketer, nothing spooky, unless that is what you fear. There's no two ways around this. I'm pretty depressed. Crap stuff happens, and there's not anything you can do to stop time's march. I get it. Recently I've been in a slump, not leaving bed for a long time, apart from getting junk food and using the bathroom. During this time I've started seeing faint faces and images, flashes for a second in my vision. Not the usual shadow people. I've just been chalking this up as my brain being exhausted, so I'm not counting it as anything. This is what messed me up though. I've been starting hearing my dead cats meowing at me. My beloved cat died away from me, and if I had waited one more night to send her to the animal hospital, she would be with me. And it really crushes me, even just typing this out. I know it's not really my fault, but I can't help these thoughts. She had a very distinct meow, and for the last few days I keep hearing her. See, I chalk this up as being exhausted, except my cat and dog hear it too. I was in bed with the dog on me and the cat on the windowsill when I heard a faint meow from below the bed. The cat shot up and froze. The dog perked his head up and growled. I had the dog check under the bed before me, because I'm a coward. But there was nothing there. I cry every time I hear the noise, and maybe that's what's driving it to continue. I'm extremely frightened because of this. I think the activity is getting worse. I'm huddled in my bed right now and I don't dare look above the covers like a child. Whatever is in my house knows what scares and upset me, and I don't think it wants me to feel happy. Maybe it's come to collect me. Who knows? Anyone with any explanation, it would be much appreciated. Hey guys, it's Mort here, and thank you so much for listening. I hope that you've enjoyed tonight's stories. If of course you did, it would mean a lot if you could let me know down below. As I said at the start, there is a giveaway happening when we hit 3,000 on Twitter and Instagram. So be sure to check out my profiles at the top of the description to follow me, and I'm going to pick a winner out of the people who follow me. I'll let you know. There's a prize for each. As always, a huge thank you to my amazing patrons for your continued support. It means a lot. And if you'd like to have your name on screen at the end of a video as a patron, you can find out how in the description. In any case, guys, hope you're all safe and well. It's time for me to sign off. Stay awesome, and I'll see you in the next one.